Does anyone know what this might be? So during a data migration project we performed, it was a while ago, we discovered a really good groundwater data set. First problem is that the name of it really didn't give much away, didn't align to obligations or conditions. Second one, the coordinates put it in the ocean. So you can imagine, as people have experience in this, how much potentially money or investment went into collecting that data. We couldn't do anything with it. The struggle is real. In another project, someone recounted how they'd gone on long service leave. Overjoyed to come back, they had no compliance issues at all. Joy was short-lived, because they also discovered while they were away they practically had no data coming in either. Issue had been coming in from a third party, no one had picked up on it. The struggle is real. In another case, during another data migration, you might be picking up, we can discover some really alarming things during a data migration. We thought it was weird that two locations had a lot of the same data during a really long period of time. We assumed the data provider had made a mistake, so we asked what was going on. Seems a logger had malfunctioned during that period, and since the two locations were pretty close to each other, we'll just use one for the other. The struggle is real. Hi, my name's Stuart and I head up the environmental part of the business at Acquire. I'm a software developer by trade, so this is all pretty confronting, but with a surname like that, I feel like I'm probably in the right spot talking about the right topic. Mick, in fact, said that they thought marketing had made a mistake, so he had to search me on LinkedIn to make sure that that is in fact my surname. And in fact, it wasn't until recently, and I've been doing this for a little while now, about a month ago, someone said, actually, with that surname, it's pretty amazing what you do. And I just couldn't believe no one had ever picked up on it. But today I wanted to share with you what I'm hoping is a really unique perspective on what we've observed. So we provide, amongst other things, a software solution for the resources industry to help organisations manage their environmental data for compliance, and especially around water. So we're going to give you a bit of a perspective on what it takes and what happens when you put it into a system managing this data on site, especially water data, about all the moving parts involved. And hopefully based on that, we'll be able to share with you probably what good looks like based on some of the things that we've observed, the good, the bad, and what I've said before, the ugly. Helping people put data into a system to manage compliance in and of itself always results in the moments and the shit moments. Unfortunately, like the stories earlier, when we come into it, it's in the past and it's happened, and we can't do much about that. But we can, it's never too late though to learn about what puts things in place to make sure it happens, it doesn't happen again, or at least we can mitigate the risk of it happening again. And after this, and I'm not sure there's any enviros in the room, next time you see your enviros on site, you might just want to give them a hug. So we've been doing this for a while, across a whole range of companies and organisations, from large, multi-operation, even multi-continent mining companies to single-site juniors, oil and gas, water utilities, councils, government departments. From my earlier anecdotes, we've made this face on numerous occasions, usually sitting across from someone making exactly the same face. But it's not that hard, right? How could these sort of mistakes happen? So I'm going to make a very, very rough and crude summary of, it's flashing, compliance. So to do the thing, we make agreements and commit to obligations, to monitor and do certain things, to then report on compliance to that in order to keep doing the thing. So I guess this is where I'm falling into it in terms of the doing the things to report on, keep doing the things. What we observe anecdotally is through experience with our projects and ongoing services is that whilst there is, and quite rightly, a lot of resourcing and money put into doing the thing, that resourcing isn't so observable for managing environmental compliance data. The people charged with environmental stewardship are often overwhelmed, under-resourced, and quite time poor. But managing water data isn't that difficult, right? It's probably straightforward. We're not talking about all the operational data that's going around, which we heard about earlier and which we'll hear about after. This is just the bit where we look at how we're treating water and reporting that to the government. So let's look at all the different dimensions of it. So these are some of the things that our customers are monitoring. They call them different things. You might have different names from, but everywhere from groundwater, surface water, storages, wastewater, industrial, river creek gauging. Then what different types of data do we have? Qualities, quantities, analysis, usage levels, balances. There's a heap of different events that are going on which we need to track as well. Then we try to categorise things. Is it raw, or is it treated, is it recycled, is it processed? You'd think in an organisation they'd have a pretty good understanding of that right across their operations. In our experience, even between different sites, they can have different categorisations. Where's it all coming from? It'd be great if it all came from the same spot, but generally you'll be getting it from real-time, device networks, there's people in the field doing manual sampling, there's a lab analysis, there's consultants, a whole different variety. And wouldn't it be great if it all came in the same format? That'd make our life a lot easier. Text files, spreadsheets, XML, databases, PDFs, Word written sheets, and still happening today. When does it all come in? Wouldn't it be great if it all came in at the same time? Every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every fortnight, every quarter, every year. So we've got everything coming in real time, we've got things coming in very ad hoc. So these are all the different dimensions that we're seeing. And once again, from that unique perspective of someone coming in and going, let's organise all your data. All right, bit of a quiz now. So we've just seen all the different dimensions of water. What about scale? When I bring up the next few slides, just think to yourself what the answer might be. Some of those who have experience might know the answer. Some of them don't, might go, wow, that's a lot. Some of them might go, that's not the half of it. And I want to talk to you because that's probably truly terrifying. The numbers represent what we might see in, say, a large operation relating to managing the water data for compliance. So not all of the environment, not all of the water data for operations, but just for managing water data for compliance. So the first one, how many compliance requirements do you think the enviros are managing on site? So obligations. Up to 1,300 different obligations. So imagine that, 1,300 different things they need to report on periodically. Just relating to water, 400. So probably a disproportionate amount considering it is right across the environmental space. So doing all those things, agreeing to do something, reporting on it, that's what they have to report on. Sampling schedules. So how individual water related schedules out there that we have to coordinate in the field for your team or third parties to collect data for. Over 120 different schedules. So different schedules, patterns, grouping of locations, parameters, test suites to test for. So that's a lot of different activity that's going on at any point in time to try to feed into those 400 different requirements. Water monitoring locations. So one customer has a fair few locations specifically related to monitoring. Can you guess how many that might be? Over 13,000 different monitoring locations. Now, not necessarily active now, but over time, this is the sort of scale that we can see. And it's really important to know that about water management and compliance. It's not just what's happening right now, it's what happens in the past and the planning for what's happening in the future. Getting data into the system, which is always great fun. You'll be loading files, generally from third parties like labs and consultants. One of our customers loads a lot. What's a lot look like? 2,000 individual files a day. That's not individual samples, that's individual files, and they can contain many different samples. And that's per day. So that's a lot of processing, a lot of information coming from third parties, moving parts just for one particular day. Okay, so based on 400 obligations requiring 120 sampling schedules across thousands of locations, fed by over 2,000 files, all coming into a system, we need to check all that now. So the limits, the triggers, the conditions are applicable. One of our customers, over 4,000. Imagine every bit of data point coming in, there's potentially 4,000 checks that may or may not be applicable to that. Checking any combination of result parameters, inside bounds, outside bounds, percentiles, all those sort of things. Not just on raw data, calculated data, aggregated data. So there's a lot of processing and moving parts going on, all trying to get back to answering those 1,200 or 1,300 and 400 requirements. But how many parameters or analytes could there be? So for one data type alone, say water lab analysis, 470 parameters just for one sample. So you look at thousands of files coming in, all of that data coming in. One sample in that one file could have 470 parameters. Maybe there's a dozen samples in there as well. So a lot. And then you look at the 4,000 different limits and triggers being applied to all of that. There's a lot of moving parts. So adding all that up, how many data points could there be? So one customer almost hitting 500 million data points. Remember, this isn't production data, this isn't operational data. This is their environmental compliance data, and that's a lot. Water would make a large part of that, but you can imagine how easy it is when trying to answer all of those compliance questions, how it can get lost in that sea of data. So hopefully you'll agree there's a lot of moving parts. Given my previous slide showing the dimensions of water data framework and now the stats on the volume and breadth, conditions, activities and data, we turn our attention to how organisations tend to approach managing it all. So when we come in for an engagement, what do you think is the most common solution we find across how companies are tackling the problem? Oh no, we've got it organised. Cool, you've got a SharePoint system, which starts off really nice and organised. And then there's an audit that happens, so, that needs a folder. Someone sends us a photo, not quite sure where that goes. Let's just put that in the root there. They've got a temp folder, not really sure what's happened there. Like such and such used to do it that way. I'm just going to shove that into an archive folder. We may need that again at some time. Happens a lot. No, we're organised. We've got a database. Now, it happens a lot. And we just are often surprised, especially we're talking about innovation here. It's our biggest competitor, and it's the most prevalent data management system used out there. So you could just imagine with all of those different dimensions and scale, it's how a lot of people are managing it. And if you can take anything out of this, remember Excel is not a database. We always say that a lot internally. And that's not just a scenario that, we saw that last week with a customer. We saw it 10 years ago. Nothing much has changed. Have you ever observed your enviros around the start of the month, start of the quarter? It can be absolute chaos as they're trying to wrangle all the data into their end of period reporting, their compliance reporting. And have you seen what happens when an audit happens? It's not if, it's when. And there's so much effort and energy that goes into trying to answer these questions. And now you know why. So when someone reaches out looking for something to manage their environmental data, we start by talking about what they want to achieve and showing them the software in a demo. During our talk, we talk about some of the things that we've covered today. Our demos often feel like therapy sessions. We did a demo recently where I talked about managing data in SharePoint and Excel, nervous laughter. Oh yeah, like that is accurate, so accurate, scary. Then I said something that really hit home. It works until it doesn't. To which came the reply, that's exactly why we're talking to you. It works until it doesn't. We all know that with Excel. Once we get into the projects, that's where the fun really starts. Thinking back to an earlier slide where I talked about all of the different dimensions of the data, imagine collating all of that and taking stock of what you have. And discovering the things that you don't have, which is some of the times the truly terrifying things. And the inconsistencies when a person responsible changed suddenly and is now being managed in a different way. That happens so much, the change of role or even change of shifts can result in inconsistencies across the board when you're managing it like that. Show me a spreadsheet and I'll show you an error in a formula and a broken link. Who changed that formula, that bit of data? When did they do it? Where did this data even come from? All of those sort of things come up. Remember, we're doing this thing to meet obligations in order to keep doing the thing. A bit scary. But so what? No one's really looking at it, are they? No one's really scrutinising this. Obviously, the answer is yes, they are. Of course they are. If you were lucky enough to be in the ESG data and disclosure session yesterday, you'd have heard about the potential for litigation for greenwashing or green hushing, one of the other myriad of phrases which amount to errors in misstating, not stating, or generally misleading, either deliberately or accidentally, because you can't show your workings. Or you can, but they paint a really bad picture. EY do a really good study each year where they survey and interview about 150 mining executives, including those in the C-suite, as well as leaders in human resources, sustainability, technology, all across the mining regions. Environmental stewardship is the second biggest risk/opportunity they identify. And drilling into that, the equal second largest one is water stewardship, which will be scrutinised by investors for ESG. So outwardly, this is recognised as quite a visible, important thing to get right. Yet, excel. So the war stories we tell, the struggles that we relate, the problems that we highlight are relatively universal. We see it quite broadly across the industry, no matter what the size of the company. So if you're sitting in the audience thinking, holy crap, that's me, you are not alone. You might also be sitting there going, thank God that's not us anymore, because a lot of people do work out how to do it really well. So I just want to share 3 things that characterise people who do it well. First one is get organised. And I know that sounds really obvious, but when it seems to come to operations where if you ask them for data, there's very little evidence of being organised. Or it sits with a third-party provider. Or it used to be there, but since such and such left, not sure where that's been going. To get organised, you have to design the program of work, starting with your obligations for each area, define the processes on how to manage that, which we'd call the life cycle of data, from generation to capture and reporting. Along the way, you have to clearly define responsibilities and standards effectively so it's people-proof. As people come and go, the way you capture, categorise, assess, analyse and report should not change. Change management is also super important. Implementing a holistic way to manage your water compliance data requires a concerted effort to change behaviours and systems, expectations and even jobs and roles. Don't underestimate the work required here and the reluctance you might actually encounter to change. The amount of times we've encountered someone who's been doing the Enviro stuff for 20 years who does not want to change, but also sometimes represents the biggest risk that company has. Can you imagine the mess that you'd get into trying to coordinate 120 different sampling schedules if you are not organised? Second, you need to remove the moving parts and the manual handling as much as possible. Rationalise the number of data sources and providers you had. We had one customer who had 26 different data providers, data stores and formats. They rationalised that down to one data store with 2 formats. So you can imagine just how that improved the way that they manage this sort of data. You need to own your data. Even if someone else is providing it, work with those providers for acceptable formats. We've seen operations select their providers and put it into contracts to saying they must provide data in a certain format. Don't let your providers dictate that data to you. Also, look to get as much as you can submitted electronically and automate, at a minimum via email, but not to a person or a system, but to a processing platform. Let the robot do the work. Let the robot tell you when things are wrong so you can then do action. Otherwise, you'll spend all of your time trying to assess and wrangle the data. Can you imagine not doing that and trying to do over 4,000 of those limits and compliance checks? And third, and I'd say from experience, this will determine if you're actually successful or not, is how you maintain your water compliance and frameworks and systems. You can get organised, you can rationalise and automate everything, But if you don't maintain it, you will have wasted a whole lot of time, expense and energy. You must establish and hold yourself accountable to a cadence of assessment and reporting without compromise. It requires discipline. Think back to the person who went on long service leave, who came back to a mess. It requires clearly defined governance around roles, sign-offs, escalations. And don't forget refinement. You need to periodically assess the effectiveness of what you're putting in place for corrections and improvements. Can you imagine the gains you could realise across 1,200 compliance obligations with 13,000 locations, processing 2,000 files a day? Even incremental improvements can have significant and long-term positive effects. Those 2,000 files a day were actually over 10,000 files a day at one stage. When we discovered this, we did the analysis, we discovered so much duplicate and unnecessary data was being provided, single email to the data provider fixed it, and we cut that by 80% overnight. I'm hoping this has all given you a really good insight into how management of water data for compliance is probably far more a complex beast than you may have thought. As we focus on ESG reporting and disclosures, the ramifications of greenwashing are more prevalent and enforced. How important is it to ensure that in fact you're organised, ensuring the whole chain of data is bulletproof? If you'd like to swap some war stories, or maybe you're an enviro and you want a hug, come see us at booth 14. Thanks very much.